All right, welcome everybody. What is going on, internet folks? This is the High Hook Podcast, and you are tuning in to episode 1. It's a live show, so that little fumble with my words is going to be in the show. Welcome everybody. You can say what's up in the chat. We can see you as you chat along. This is the High Hook Podcast, as I mentioned, brand new internet TV show hosted by me, Matt Sorrentino. You can follow me online at Swagmatic. But here's what the show's about. Brand new fishing talk show. It's going to be on whenever I want it to be. There's no set schedule right now. But basically, I'll have a guest on or multiple guests sometimes, and we will do what we do and just talk fishing. And today, we are talking tog. We're talking blackfish and trophy blackfish at that. Our guest today is Frank Mihalic, who has a brand new article out in this month's issue of the Fisherman Magazine called the double-digit do's and don'ts for trophy tautog. If you don't have it, I have a copy here. We've also linked to it in the chat, so it is available online if you want to follow along. We're going to be discussing this article at length in today's show. So just scroll up to the top of the chat and look for the comment from Fisherman's headquarters. It's got the link right to that article, so you can just check that and click it and check it out. Follow along with us as we talk about it here tonight. But in the article, Frank shares his tips for success. Most of which you'll find out in this discussion that I couldn't disagree with more for me and my fishing style. And we'll get more into that, into the two different styles that me and Frank both employ and both employ well. So we both do well with two very vastly different strategies. I guess the saying is true. There's more than one way to skin a cat. And in this circumstance, there is definitely more than one way to catch a double-digit tog. But we're going to dissect both of our strategies and find out, more importantly than our differences, the things that we do or that we agree with that are very similar and might hold true for everybody or all toggers looking to find that big fish. So without further ado, I am gonna bring Frank in, and we'll say what's up to Frank. So here he is. Hey Frank, welcome.
What up, Swaggy? Thanks for inviting me tonight.
Yeah, man, we've been talking about doing this for a while now, and I couldn't think of a better topic and a better person to have on board. So super stoked that you're here. We got a bunch of people in the chat already. Lots of people talking, lots of legends in the chat as well. So we got about 96 viewers currently. So you're on the hot seat. So, but
no
yeah,
pressure.
Yeah, we definitely want to talk about your article. If you guys, again, haven't read it, it's in the November issue, the Fisherman Magazine, the do's and don't Trophy tautog by no other than Frank Mihalic right here. So again, welcome Frank, and let's get this show started. So before we get into the article, maybe just tell us a little bit about yourself and fishing. For those of you that don't know Frank, here's your chance to tell them who you are.
Born and raised in Jersey, Matt. Started tog fishing when I got my first boat when I was 19 years old, and I started fishing behind Atlantic City, and I was looking for them in the backwaters, and I finally found my first one behind Brigantine in Little Panama, and it was about a 6-pounder. It was kind of an obsession, and it took me by surprise ever since. It's been my thing.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. I remember catching blackfish for the first time many years ago on the jetty in Barnegat Inlet. I saw a man, his name was John, an Asian man. I would go blue fishing every night, and I seen this guy pulling out these monster blackfish straight down off the jetty. I'm like, what the hell is this guy doing? After seeing him 3 or 4 times, I finally worked up the courage to go say, hey man, what are you doing? What are you catching? And he showed me, little hooks, pieces of crab, and find a hole. And I cooked my first fish, and it's been game on ever since. So I know you, and I know a lot of these guys in the chat can definitely relate to that feeling of addiction to these fish. And I mean, there's absolutely nothing else like it, and that's why we do what we do. So
yeah, once you set that hook the first time, man, and that rod doubles over, you're like, oh, now I get it.
No doubt about it, man. Pound for pound, they got to be one of the hardest fighting fish in the world. So
sure.
But let's get into your article. That's why we're here tonight. So let's talk about it. You obviously talk about lots of different techniques that you use, and as I mentioned in the intro here, there's a vastly different way that I fish. So let's kind of explain to people, what our go-to styles are, And obviously with most black fishermen, when you go on a boat, you're going to bring, 4 or 5 rods with you, 3 rods at least. For different scenarios, you want to be equipped for all sorts of different things that can happen out there. But let's say you could only bring one setup with you. What would it be and why?
I'm going to bring my Century Pro Togger and my Saltiga. That's going to be the most versatile thing for me that I have the most confidence in under all conditions for big fish.
I feel that. I knew you were going to say that before as I was writing that question earlier, preparing for tonight. I said I knew without a doubt Frank's going with the Pro Togger and the Saltiga. I choose a Daiwa reel myself. It's much smaller than yours. I'm going with the Daiwa Coastal 200. Is a bait casting reel. I upgraded the handle on that. I use a Jigging World power knob, which for bait casting fishing, I think just that little bit of leverage is a game changer on those reels. And I go with a Daiwa Proteus SS, which is a 6'4" rod, very tiny micro guides, very different from your style of fishing, an 8-foot rod with heavier stout line. And I think that just kind of speaks to my style of fishing more. I have mine spooled with 15-pound test, and I use a 30-pound top shot, double the length of the rod, so about 13 feet long for myself. And for me, we'll get into it more a little bit later on why I go so light. It's all about speed for me. And we'll talk about that a little bit later because I don't want to cut into too much of the article in the beginning. But that's what it's about for me is fishing light, getting down there fast, and getting it up there quick. As Joe Zagorski said in the chat, I am a jigger through and through. So no doubt about it.
No doubt.
But you spool up completely different. What's on your Saltiga 15?
Yeah, I have J Braid 50 on there right now. My top shot is a Andy Pink 60-pound, and I put about a 20-foot top shot on. And I go down to the bottom. I double up about the bottom 3 feet with a spider hitch. I rig it, Belmar rig. So I tie a spider hitch in that bottom 3 feet of line. I hang my 8-ounce weight on there, and I tie my rig right in directly via Belmar rig.
Right. So let's talk about why you go with the line you do, and then I'll talk about why. And I mean, these are in the article. If you guys are following along, these are the first 2 points that Frank makes in the article. That's do develop excellent tackle and rigging skills, and then he gets into don't use a high-speed reel. Why don't you talk about that a little bit more before we talk into why?
Sure. The reason I'm recommending not to use a high-speed reel, and simply me versus you, I'm winching up a 8 and 10 ounce weight all day. And if you have a reel with, say you have a reel with a 6.4 or 6.8 gear ratio, when you drop that thing to the bottom, when you go to reel up a 10 ounce weight, you're going to turn the handle, and it's actually going to go and it's going to stop. You're going to have to actually pump the rod just to retrieve your sinker all day because your gear is actually too high. When you gain that much speed, you lose that much power, and it's just that simple. So if you find something that works for the way you fish and the way you want to rig correctly, it works for you. Like Matt, your high gear ratio works great for you, but you're only retrieving 1, 2, maybe a 3-ounce jig. It's fine for that. It's not even a consideration. But for what I'm doing, when I swing that rod and I crank on that thing as much as I can, I want to move that fish as far away from the wreck as I can. I don't want to just hook them and let them swim around a little bit. Maybe I get lucky. I'm going to do my best to try to get that fish's head out of there before he even knows what happened.
Yeah. So I'm glad that you brought that up. Actually, it's a good point. Because that's something that we can agree on, as our styles are vastly different. You want power, and I want speed. I fish a 7-to-3-1 gear ratio reel, which goes against everything you say right here in the beginning of the article. But as you mentioned, for me, I am a jigger. Very rarely will I have heavier than 2 ounces on. Oftentimes, I'm down to 3/4. But usually the money zone is an ounce and a half. And I want to get down there, and I fish as light as I possibly can so I can get down there quickly. And a lot of guys who jig, like I said, I fish 15-pound braid. I fish Cortland braid. As Brooks is in the chat here, the Cortland rep has mentioned you can get Cortland Master Braid at Fisherman's headquarters. A little shout out to Cortland there. Thanks for tuning in, Brooks. But yeah, I fish 15-pound Master Braid. And the reason that I don't go high. I could, right? I could go higher. But the reason that I want to go as light as possible, and for me, that's 15-pound test, is because I want to cut through the water as quickly as I can. And what I find is 15 is the magic number for me. And the reason that is that's because that is the max drag of the reel that I'm using. So my max drag is right about 15 pounds. Now, when you look at a max drag rating, that's with the spool, near empty. So with the full spool, you're a little bit less than that, actually. So probably like 13, 14 pounds of max drag. So with my drag locked all the way down, if I set a hook into a fish, no matter what pound test I have on, it's 15, my reel is going to give out before my drag does. So my drag on my reel is going to let loose. It's going to take drag before my line snaps. If I fished a 10-pound test main line, that wouldn't be the case maybe. When that fish hits, the strength of the line will give in before the strength of the reel. And so for me, with a 15-pound max drag, I don't ever have to worry about breaking my braid, which I think is super important. And if you have a heavier reel, like what is the max braid on that Saltiga? You're like 25, 30 pounds, right?
Of drag?
Yeah. Do you know?
Somewhere around there.
Yeah,
I
I know
don't
it's
know.
much higher. So you want to obviously
I just
fish.
crank it up. I just crank it as hard as I can. I'm ready
for
to
sure.
go.
Yeah, without a doubt, you want to go. You don't want to, you don't. It's a tug of war in the beginning, so you don't want to give those fish a chance.
No, seriously, I tighten it up till I can just pull a little bit off. If I can just pull a little off, I'm good.
Right.
And a lot of times when I hook the fish, I'll leave it that tight until I get them off the bottom. And when I get the fish up off the bottom a little bit, I'll move the rod under my arm, and at that point, maybe I'll back off a click or two off the drag, just a little micro click or two, but that's really about it. I just prefer to fight the fish on the rod. If the rod goes to the bottom, I'll just let the rod go to the bottom. But at that point, I'm strictly playing the fish from the middle and the butt section of the rod.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. So I think the rod is probably the most important piece of equipment that you can have, and that's why I love the rod that I have. Like I said, I'm very comfortable and confident in the ability. It is a small rod, but it has backbone and balls to hell. That rod locks down about a third of the way down, which is my sweet spot and where I like it. And I trust that. No problem. Rich says 17.6 pounds of drag on the Celtica. So anything, if
Thanks, Rich.
Yeah, if you were to, obviously if you were to fish a 15-pound drag and you had a fish that put, that much drag on the line would give out before the reel, which is something that we definitely don't want to do. But yeah, Tony says lock it down. We definitely want to lock down our drags. We don't want to give those fish a chance to get back. And getting back into, topic conversation here is some of you brought up earlier. The most important part of this fight, and this is something I learned from Captain Tom Daffin down in Cape May, and it's just the standard truth against all blackfishing. You have that first, 10, 15 foot to win that battle. And if you can win that battle, you'll get that fish up. No doubt about it. You will absolutely get that. And the way that we do that, the way that we win that battle is different. You have an 8-foot rod, super long, and you're swinging straight. That swing right there, boom, you got the fish up 8 foot, right? A couple cranks on the reel, and he's up 20 foot. And then, as you mentioned, rod butt down, under your arm, and now you're fighting the fish in basically open water. You got him, and now you get to play around a little bit.
Well, actually, Matt, when I'm sitting there and I'm fishing a slack line and I'm kind of relaxed, I kind of have my rod out towards the middle, like at 3 o'clock. When I feel a blackfish hit, I'll immediately take up a little bit of a turn and I'll move my rod down to about 4 o'clock. And when I get the right hit, 1, 2, maybe 3, that rod tip goes to the sky, the rod butt goes in my gut, and then I crank as hard as I can. I crank until he stops me.
Yeah.
So it's a little more than 8 foot. When I reel it down, I probably gain a couple more feet, and then I swing it, so I'm probably getting 10, and then I'm cranking until he stops me. So I might really have that fish 16 feet off the bottom before he even knows what happened.
Yeah, and I think that's the most important thing, and I tell people that all the time. And so you do it, with brute strength, basically. You got a stout rod, you got a heavy duty reel, thick line, and you're ripping the fish up. And you can't be successful in my way of fishing without being quick. So I have a 6-foot 4-inch rod. So when I do that swing, and I fish with one hand, just it's more comfortable for me. So I have the rod in my right hand. I choose to use a left-handed retrieve reel. So when I set the hook, I'm here, This is it. I mean, I'm down towards the water, same thing like you. You lower that tip, you want to get as much leverage as possible. And then, obviously I'm a gigantic human being. I'm 6'5". I got the wingspan of an albatross. So when I set the hook, I'm up as high as I can, from as low as I can to as high as I can. Same, that is a truth, I would say, for every black fisherman. And then for me, where we differ with the power and the speed is my high retrieve reel. It's a bait caster, so one turn is not going to get as much line in as your Saltiga or even as a spinning reel. So I want a high speed reel. So when I crank, I'm picking them up, because you do, when you set that hook and you set it right, and I mean, hands down, without a doubt, that is my favorite part of fishing. Any fishing, period, is that hook set. It's probably the thing that brings me the greatest joy in life, is just crossing a fish's eyes and setting a hook into a fish, and especially into a big fish. But that power that you get in that hook set, and if you've seen me, if you guys are in the chat and you fish with me, you know that when I miss, I have to look foolish, because it's a big swing. I'm swinging for the fences every time, because I want to punch that fish in the face, basically. You give him that uppercut and he's yanked up, and then you're reeling. I'm reeling quick as I can till that line comes tight, until that fish realizes he's hooked. And for me, it's a high-speed reel, so I'm collecting as much line as I possibly can, and then he's up, and now he knows he's hooked and he's fighting. And when they're bigger, they take a little bit of drag. Like I said, I have a 15-pound drag, but that's where we want to be. So
Matt, staying with the do's and don'ts now, we've all seen a lot of guys. I mean, we've seen, there's guys that really, really struggle with catching big fish. And I've actually seen guys that they'll make that big swing and the rod's up in the air, and they don't crank their reel. And then they say, oh yeah, I got a good one. And then they lower the rod tip and they put it under their arm, which allows the fish to get into the structure. And then they try to crank, oh, I'm stuck. And we see the same person will do this, out of a bad habit. And that's the kind of thing that you can't really, how do you really tell somebody if they really don't want to improve? They might not really be aware of that. And the other thing is, what about guys we see pump the rod? I mean, pump the rod.
I don't want to get too far ahead, because that's something you have at the end of the article. So let's try to keep it in line here, so people at home can follow along with us. But
good enough.
Yeah, no, I agree. And you do see a lot of mistakes. That is definitely probably one of the biggest mistakes I'll see out of people, not just big toggers. I also see people, and I've seen this in person. I was fishing the Osprey one day. Is when they set a hook, they're not setting big enough. A small hook set that you're going to do, maybe that's successful with a fluke or a sea bass or a porgy, is not going to be good enough for a blackfish. And a lot of times you're gonna end badly. I remember I was fishing last year on the Osprey. I was fishing next to Chris Mears. Shout out to Chris if you're watching. But Chris, it was fishing right next to me. We got a good shoe going, and he gets a bite and he sets the hook, and it's a small little hook set, and he takes a couple cranks and he goes, I think I'm stuck. And I'm like, man, you got to fish, like reel your effing line. And he finally reels, and he got lucky that fish didn't take advantage of that mistake, and he was able to get it up. I think it was 8 or 9 pounds. He won the pool for the day, and it was an excellent fish, and he got very, very lucky that fish didn't capitalize on his mistake, because most of the time, if you give them an inch, they'll take a mile, and they'll.
Well, if you fish with us, Joe Zagorski will straighten you out, and then he gets me all nervous, and then I drop my pliers, and bad shit happens. It's just all good.
I'm glad you brought the pliers out tonight. That's funny.
They're magic. They almost sunk Joe's boat. I swear to God, I was banned forever. Still am.
Yeah, he'll have you back, Joe. Polish Joe's he's the man. He's the man.
He certainly is.
But yeah, so obviously we've learned so far, big hook sets, and you want to be quick, or you want to get that leverage on the fish to get them up, get them away from the wreck, to fight. So we'll move on in your article here, and we'll talk more about baiting. So your next bullet point is do use great baits. So can you get into that a little bit for us?
Oh yeah. I'm not even really going to get too into green crabs. I'm just going to, there you go. I'm going to go right into white crabs. But one of the things I do, when I walk onto the boat, I have new top shots on my rods, but I didn't yet put my rigs on my rods. And the reason being, the first thing I do, I go in there and I try to knock out Rich Bizzari to get his spot or whatever. And, I get my rod somewhere. And then I usually look at the bait, and I want to see what the baits are like. If they're white leggers, and if there's a whole lot of like little 2-inch white leggers, that I'm going to use individually, I'm just going to use one crab on each hook. I'm going to use a slider rig just like this, just a regular straight up slider rig. You know, one hook snelled on the back, one hook just stacked right on top of it, put one crab on each one, and it's just perfect that way. But what if I look at those crabs and I see they're nice little, you know, 3-inch cherries that are a little soft? Maybe they're on the shed where you really don't want to start cutting them because sometimes they're so mushy. If you cut them, the good stuff just kind of oozes out. And when I get a crab like that, I'll neatly trim the legs off, and I'll use a different version of the slider rig. It's called a sweetheart rig, and it basically looks like this. See the way those hooks are? They're inverted. The one that stacks on just goes a different direction. And all that does is when you trim those legs off and you put these hooks into the crab, you can put one in the legs this way and you put one in the legs this way. And all that does is the leader kind of comes out the back. You can see how that leader just comes in one and out the other, and the leader comes out this way. So the crab will look like it's sitting on the hook upside down. But at the same time, your leader's in a nice position, so your crab's not spinning on its way to the bottom. If I find myself using a whole crab, I use the sweetheart rig. I find it very useful for that. I also like to use the V rig a lot. And here's the V rig. It's very simple to tie. Just it's almost like a snafu. You got two snelled hooks on there. You have a length of leader with a double surgeon's knot. Another double surgeon's knot forming a loop on top. The whole rig's like 8 inches. It's real nice if you're fishing like a half of a large crab where you want to have 2 hooks into one piece of bait. It seems to sit a little nicer than the slider. The slider I want to use if I'm using 2 halves. If I'm using 2 nice pieces of bait, I want them both on the slider. So if one gets beat up, the other one still looks pristine. But if they're really, really big crabs and I want to use a half of one of those crabs, I'll use that V rig. But that's where I go. And, you know, just trying real hard to keep those baits pristine and neat and on the hooks perfectly all day.
Yeah, I think that's a truth that you can take across all of fishing is you want to match your bait to your hook and etc. So for me with fishing the jigs and fishing the jigs exclusively, my hook size is pretty much always going to be the same. I mean, it's almost always, you know, 4050 hook on a 1.5 ounce jig. And so for me, if I get the small crabs, obviously we're fishing them whole. You know, you get a gem crab, you cut it in half, put it through the legs, and then sometimes you'll get those bigger crabs. And if I have the bigger crabs, if that's all I have to pick from, then, you know, obviously I'm not putting it on whole, and putting on a half a crab is going to be too big for my hook. I'm just going to feed the crab. So what I end up doing is, especially with larger crabs, is sometimes I'll often quarter them or cut them down. But I mean, bait selection is something that you definitely want to get comfortable with. Obviously, whites are going to outproduce you know, greens. That's the bait of choice for blackfishing is white leggers. So Frank we skipped over the greens entirely. And I mean, when you're out in, you know, December, January, February, there's nothing else you want to be using. I mean, we don't need to get into hermit crabs or anything like that, but white crabs are almost always a bait that's going to work better than everything else you have. So finding that, and then finding the size that works for you. Obviously, everybody has their preference of a crab, whether your preference is I want 2 little crabs, or I want a perfect size white, or I want to fish a soup crab. Like, you know, you have your preference, and we don't have to give everybody all of our secrets, but everybody has their preference to their preferred bait. But for me, it's about cutting it down. And I fish differently. You know, if I'm fishing on our boat with Tony, and or if I'm fishing on a 6-pack charter, if I'm fishing on a head boat. On a head boat, I'm more inclined to use a bigger crab cut down into quarters, and I got the shell off, and all the goodness is out because I'm competing against 30 other anglers. So when I drop that down, I want the fish to come to my hook instead of the guy next to me who's got his shells on and his legs on and everything's still imposed. They're going to come and try to find an easy meal. Now, I might not get the biggest fish that way, but oftentimes, you know, I'll get the most fish that way. And on a party boat, I think it's just a game of numbers. You want, you know, pull in as many as you can. And I mean, obviously, Chris has mentioned in the chat, there's other, I mean, there's cooked shrimp people will bring out in the springtime, and clams and hermits. There's lots of baits to pick from, but a bait that's always going to be be choice is the whites.
Yeah. Now, hey Matt, do you go through a rotation in your cuts of bait like I do, or is that just something crazy that I do?
What do you mean? Elaborate.
Like I'll go through this thing during the course of the day. Like when we first go out there and we start fishing, if I have an assortment of baits and I don't know what the fish are really eating that day, I'll start out with two medium halves of a crab on a slider rig. If they're not eating that too good, then I'll go with two small crabs on a slider rig, or I might go with a medium crab on a sweetheart rig. I might go with a large whole crab and I'll step on it a few times and I'll just let that soak a little bit and I'll wait and see what's getting the better action. Sometimes I'll notice when I use two small crabs, they're getting beat up really good. So all of a sudden next time I'll go two small crabs and I'll go two small crabs again until I start getting the bite that I want. But there's that rotation of different cuts of bait during the course of the day that it's really, really important that people don't get stuck in a rut. I caught a fish last week on a large whole crab, so I always use large whole crabs. It's like the guy that goes out and fishes one spot his whole life. It's like you got to move, got to do things different.
Right. Yeah. So I don't have a rotation like that per se. What I will do is when I first get to a spot, I'll cut the crab. I take the top shell off. And I'll do that for the first couple baits because I want to get some scent in the water and I want chums them in. So I want to get the fish into me, and then I'll leave more of the crab on. So with jigging for me, it's kind of like picking through the smaller fish or wading through the smaller fish a lot of times, and that's something I learned from Dante. He'll claim that he taught me how to blackfish. I'll tell you right now, he's full of shit. But I did learn this from him, and that's just to be patient and wait. I fish with him, and I've seen him come up with an empty jig more times than not. And he's like, well, I'm not going to swing because that fish is only 4 or 5 pounds. So, kudos to him for having the patience. Like when I get a 5-pound fish that knocks, I want to swing. It's my, but if you can wait on those fish and you have a bigger bait or you have more for the fish to chew, I find that will lead to a larger caliber fish. But in the beginning, it's all about getting those little fish into the baits for me and getting the water chummed up so they can come in and kind of get things started. Because I mean that's
I try really to be patient, and I wanna swing on the good tug. I'll get the little tugs. I'll be patient. I'll keep feeding them. When I get a good tug, that's when I want to swing. Usually when I can't take it anymore.
Yeah. No, for sure. Yeah. And I mean, you'll that's just time on the water. You'll learn what those tugs feel like. I mean, so when people talk to me and they ask me about jigging, one of the first piece of advice I say to a new togger or new jigger is let them eat the bait. Let them eat the whole bait and do it 5 or 6 times. Just feed them the whole crab. And then you'll have that feel down for what that feels like when you should have swung, because you'll get that bite, you'll get the tap, 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 then you'll get the thud. And then the bites will stop if your bait's gone. You'll get a good bite and you're like, oh, that's the one I should have swung on. Well, if you don't swing on it a couple times, you'll get the feel like, okay, that's what it feels like when I need to swing. And then sometimes with a jig, it's even better. I mean, it doesn't happen often, and when it does, it's usually a mondo. Is your line just goes slack, and the fish is just inhaled the whole jig and swims away. I mean, and that's just the best feeling in the world. So I mean, it doesn't happen every time with a jig. Sometimes you're waiting for that thud, but often it does happen where it just swims away.
Well, big fish definitely, they do big fish things, and the way they eat that bait is definitely a whole different ball game. And trying to be patient and wait through. And a lot of times too, you'll throw that nice big bait down, you'll put it down, you'll get a couple little taps, and all of a sudden it'll stop. And it's really, really a time to be patient there, because I'll stop. And I think what a lot of times happens is the big fish will see the small fish active on a bait. And sometimes I think the big fish will actually move over and push that little fish away. And maybe he has a mouthful because maybe he just went over there and cleaned your jig a minute ago and he's still chewing that crab. But he knows there's something going on over here, so he'll come over and push those little fish away, and he'll kind of guard that big bait that he wants to eat. Sometimes they kind of lay on it, I think. That's why sometimes we hook them underneath, but sometimes I think they kind of protect it by laying on it. And sometimes we get that sensation with our line where it just feels a little bit heavy, but there's no thump, thump, thump. And I just try really to just keep my cool and be patient. And sure enough, usually a few minutes later, you get the bite you want. And I really try to work that moment in the bite.
Yeah. I would agree with that. You also, I want to kind of move through the article here, so we're not on all night long. But so you talk about changing your bait on every single drop. I think that's something that's kind of self-explanatory for people. Um, you obviously want to keep a fresh bait in. It you know, obviously you're getting guts washed out. One thing that you didn't mention that I like to do, excuse me, and that's before I will totally abandon a bait. You know, you talk about you dropping down a bait and you get the goodness sucked out, you get the guts sucked out, and then you come back up and you drop down another one, get the guts sucked out, and you drop down another one, get the guts sucked out. As a person who doesn't have Joe Zagorski's money and has to pay for white crabs, I hate throwing them in with, you know, maybe just the gut sucked out or something. So one thing that I do that works for me a lot of times when I find that they're just sucking on the guts or just chewing on the lungs is that they just want something soft to get them going. So I find that if I come up and I still got a good amount of meat in that crab, and it is just the, you know, just the soft stuff on top that's gone. If I step on that bait and I give it a real good, just a smash on the deck of the boat, and I drop it back down, I'll get those bites that I was getting on the guts. I don't necessarily just have to toss the crab out in the water. I mean, white crabs get expensive, especially come, you know, late December and early January as the suppliers grow smaller. So it just I hate throwing money in the water. But and you can Tony will vouch for me because I yell at him all the time. He throws in these perfectly gem baits. I'm like, come on, man. But
I'm just working that thing like a machine, Matt. You know, when it comes up, it's off. The new bait's on. Back into the water as quick as I can.
Yeah, I mean, without a doubt, having fresh bait is something, you know, something that, and that's something I learned early is baits get washed out. If you do have a bait down there and it's, you know, 10 minutes without a bite, I mean, if you pull it up and put a fresh bait on, you might get bit right away. Without a doubt, they definitely get washed out. But you know, if I have it down and I get a couple taps and then nothing, and I pull it up and then I step on it and I put it back down, you know, that works for me too. If I put it back down after I step on it, and I don't get bite, then I can, you know, always put a fresh one on. But that's something that I do that's a little bit different. You know, and that's something you talked about. Don't get lazy. You know, guts get washed out. Change your baits. Have fresh baits. Obviously, very important. Somebody mentioned in the chat, Chris asked me earlier if I have a jig preference or a color preference for my jig. I do not. Fish eat crabs, man. So these blackfish eat crabs, and I think that's really all that matters. I mean, there's no color on a gray sinker. You'll see oftentimes in my pictures, I have every possible color of tog jig. For me, it's just about, you know, a weight and a hook and getting down there and getting the crab to the fish. So let's move on to something that I think confuses the hell out of a lot of people when you see it, especially Dick Larson, who mentions it all the time. And that is you say, do learn to fish a slack line. Now, when a lot of people hear that, they assume that you're fishing your line and your line has a bow in it or a bow in it, and it's not a taut line. And that is absolutely not what you mean when you say that. So why don't you tell folks a little bit more about what you mean when you say fish a slack line?
It's real easy to describe. Let me see if I can show you while I'm sitting here without standing up. If you have the right kind of rod, it'll just balance and it'll just float right here in your hand. And that's really how you want it to be. With an 8 or a 10 ounce weight on the bottom, as the boat's pitching and rolling, you should be able to just kind of stand there. And as the boat goes up, you can let the tip go down. As the boat goes down, you can let the tip go up. At all the time, not moving your sinker on the bottom, but your line is taut enough that if you do feel tap, 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 you can immediately, oh, let me get into position. Let me get tight on the reel, and I get a fish, and then I set the hook. So the idea of fishing a slack line is how you're waiting for a bite, the position you're in when you're waiting for a bite, and that you're being very, very careful not to move the bait. Because there's some days the fish will eat it when you're bouncing it on the bottom. Some days they'll want it when you cast it out and you're dragging it back across the sand, and they'll come over and they'll pick it up and eat it. There's other days that if you move that sinker, they won't touch that crab for 15 minutes. So it's really important to learn that skill of fishing a slack line, of being able to flip it out there, come tight on it, get comfortable enough where you can sit there and fish a slack line and be patient enough that when you do get the bite, you can get it into the position and set the hook.
Yeah. So to clarify for folks at home, and I would agree 100%, it's one of the most important aspects of fishing, and it gets into your next point in the article, is that the line itself is there's not a belly in the line. You're not a slack, because people do fish that up north and stuff. I know a lot of guys that will fish a belly in the line, and they'll watch the line. You won't, if you do that, you won't feel a bite. You won't see a bite. You will see the bite. You have to watch the line itself, but you won't feel it. And that's not what you mean at all. But what he's saying, and what I agree with 100%, and the way that I fish is my jig is on the bottom, my weight's on the bottom, and my rod is just, the tip is just tight enough to keep that line straight so I have a feel. But if I were to lower my tip of my rod even just a centimeter, then my line would slack. There would be a belly in that line. And that's the magic point that you want to hit, where, that line is just tight enough for you to feel the bite, but it's also, if you put it down, it slacks up. And that gets into Frank's next point, which is, don't bounce the sinkers, because if your line is too taut, that's exactly what's going to happen. As the boat's bouncing up and down, your sinker, your jig is going to bounce up and down. And these fish aren't super aggressive predators. They're not attacking everything that moves. They're more grazing on the bottom. They're eating mussels and clams and a lot of prey that just sits there and kind of lets them go. So as your crab is sitting there, if you have a crab jumping up and down in the water, that's not something that's natural, and they're not going to attack it unless they're, starving for 3 weeks. And I gotta tell you, like, a lot of people bounce sinkers. Especially beginner blackfish. Black fishermen bounce sinkers, and you'll see it so often on a party boat where guys are just not used to this type of fishing, and they know that it has to be tight. And those are the guys that are not getting bit because their baits are bouncing up and down. The sinkers are slamming on the deck, and as you mentioned in your article, sound travels underwater, especially. I had a guy a while back when I was on the Osprey down in Atlantic City. Fishing next to me, I'm getting a good bite, and when you're on a party boat, I highly recommend moving. Keep your head on a swivel. If you're not getting bit and somebody else is, make a move. Go down, make some new friends. You don't have to overcrowd somebody and stick your rod through their legs to get in on their bite, but you can kind of focus on a certain part of the boat that has the right structure where the fish are. So this guy comes over and joins me. I'm getting a good bite, which I'm totally cool with. I'm getting bit. Come on over. The more the merrier. Let's do it together. I don't mind that. So come on over. But he's over there, and we've got a nice little swell going, a little rock, and his rod is tight the whole time, and he's moving it up and down and moving it up and down. His sinker's bouncing, and my bite just stops completely. And so like I tell him, I'm like, hey man, I think you're bouncing your sinker a little bit. You kind of want to try to balance your rod and kind of go with the flow. And he's like, no, my sinker's not bouncing, man. So like, I'm like, all right, obviously this guy doesn't want to listen to anybody, and you kind of don't, it's not my place necessarily to tell somebody, hey, this is how you do it, if they don't ask. If you don't want advice, I'm not going to give it to you. But the mate came over, and I told the mate, I'm like, hey man, like, if you want to help this guy, he won't listen to me. But the mate tried to help him, and he basically told the mate to go F himself. But he came over there and he killed my bite. So what I did was I took my bucket of crabs, I reeled up, and I went to the other side of the boat, and I got as far away from him, and I tried to find and build another bite, because sometimes, that's just what you got to do in that circumstance.
Well, Matt, for so many years, black fishermen have had, they've had this moniker where they like to tell new black fishermen, oh, you got to hook them right before they put it in their mouth, or, you got to wait till the second tug or the third tug, or you got to hit them just before they give you the first tug. And it's like, it's so confusing. And I think guys are so stressed out, and then they have a hard time hooking them because they are naturally difficult to catch. That's why we love to catch them. And that's just, people get all stressed out trying to find success, and they don't want to look to anybody else to try to help them fill in some of these blanks, and that thing with the sounds. Yeah, you're right. I mean, blackfish aren't the smartest critters in the world, but ain't no crazy one going to come out and eat a dancing green crab. And all of a sudden, picture you sitting in this house, and your house is rocks, or you're in a steel barge, and all of a sudden you got all these people, knocking all these things on your top of your house. You're like, is there something wrong? Maybe I'll just stay indoors and I'm not going to go eat today. It really does come down to being that simple, where I've been on boats with new guys, and they've all been sinker bouncers. and it was a horrible catching day. And it really does come down to that sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, if you're on a smaller boat where that's happening, maybe you're on like a private charter or something where that's, and you're the sixth man on a 6-man charter and 5 of them are bouncing. Sometimes you might have to cast away from the boat and try to get lucky out there and hope that you don't break off on something while you're coming in. Yeah, let's move on. Do practice hooking and fighting a bulldog. So I like that. I like that strategy. You want to treat every fish like the big one, so when you get the big one, you're ready for it. So how would you say that you practice hooking and fighting the big fish?
Well, you don't really know how big that fish is by the way it bites. I mean, you can tell with a little tiny tap, tap, tap when you're being patient. But when you get a decent tug, I really try to practice fighting every fish the same way. When I do get a good tap, I come off the slack line. I reel down to about the 4 o'clock position. I'll wait usually for about the 3rd or the 4th good tug. Then I'll move my rod tip up to about 11 o'clock. At the same moment, my rod butt goes in my gut, and I crank the reel handle until the fish stops me. If it's a good fish, it'll stop you. And at that, I'll just hold it there. I'll just hold it until the fish starts to calm down a little bit. I'll try to get some more cranks on them. When I get them up a little bit, then I'll move the rod under my arm, and then I'll play the fish from there, where the rod will be at, say, between the 3 and the 4 o'clock position, where I can keep the bend in the heavy, powerful part of the rod, and I can play that fish up the way I need to. When the fish gets near the top, the mate will be near the side. I'll kind of move the rod away from the mate. When the mate's there with the net in the water, when he's ready to go, I'll move the rod in front of him so he can net the fish. I'm also very, very paranoid about never letting the fish break the surface of the water. In the winter, the water gets very clear. The fish is closer to the surface than you think it is. So it's really important not to get them so far up that you actually let the fish get out of the surface of the water.
Yeah. So I agree. I think a lot of things that you said there are very factual. And obviously one thing that you mentioned is that you don't know how big that fish is when you're getting a bite a lot of times. I mean, the small fish and the big fish kind of feed the same way. And that's just, they'll go through and they'll pick at the crab and they just kind of say, hey, is this something that I want to eat before they decide to go for it. So you definitely want to swing on every fish the way that you want to swing on the right fish. So I agree with you there 100%.
Practice on the small ones, and when it's a big one, you might get them.
Yeah, I mean, obviously fishing a jig, when they swim away with it, it tends to be a bigger fish. But I mean, I can have a 4 or 5 pound fish swim away with the same jig that a 13-pound fish can do. So you don't know. And my very first double-digit blackfish was a fish that I was not expecting to be a double-digit blackfish. It was just we were in the zone. We had a good bite going. We were catching roaster size fish, 4 or 5 pound fish. I had the same bite, the same everything, same hook set, and then when I got it up, there it is, boom! My first 10 after getting so close for so long. It felt really good. But yeah, I mean, that was something that I was treating every fish the same way, and I still do. Every fish I want to catch, the same way. And then when I get them to the water, I don't know what's wrong with me, but I want to swing them all into the boat if I can. I swing them in, no nets, team no nets.
Yeah.
And luckily,
you just got to be on autopilot, bro. How you fight that fish, you just have to be on autopilot, because the muscle memory and everything just kicks in. And I know what you will know when it's a big fish. Once you set that hook, when you go to lift that rod up and you feel the weight of that fish, a lot of guys just panic right there, and it's a big fish, so now I'm going to fight it this way, but it's a little fish, so I'm going to fight it this way. No, you're not. You're going to fight it the same. You're going to fight every fish the same way all the time, because that's what you do. You get into that habit. And it's very important that you recognize you're going to fight them all like big fish. So when you do get the opportunity, you're going to land the big fish instead of fighting them all like little fish. And then you lose 3/4 of your big fish. But some guys are little fish guys. Some guys are big fish guys.
Yeah, I want to be a big fish guy every time. And then the last point that I highlighted in your article, the Fisherman Magazine didn't highlight in your article, which I thought was very foolish. But the opening sentence of the last paragraph is, finally, for the hardcore togger, there are no naps until the boat is on its way back in. And that is, without a doubt, absolutely true. One quote that I'll attribute to Captain Tony is something that I take to heart now, and it's very true in all sorts of fishing, every season, and that is anything can happen at any time. And that is very true. I mean, obviously, there's certain tides that are better, certain moon cycles that are better, certain water clarity that's better for fishing. So you can hedge your bets, but it's 100% accurate that anything can happen at any time. You never know when that bite's going to come, but it will definitely not come if you're sitting in the cabin or if you're eating a sandwich. We get lucky with blackfishing when it's time to pull the hooks and move to a different spot. You get a little bit of free time. Make that the time that you're going to, hit the microwave on the party boat or grab your sandwich on a head boat or on a charter or what have you.
But when we're out with Tony, you're pulling the hook, so I get a chance to get a snack when we're doing that. But
yeah,
that's exactly it. Anything that give me a couple more moments, time in the water, and the same thing if I get hung up on the bottom. A lot of times I'll get hung on the bottom, and you get so spoiled fishing. You're right, Joe. One bite can change your life. You're exactly right. You get so spoiled fishing on excellent boats, and I'm so lucky to fish on Fishmonger a lot that a lot of times I'll get hung up, and Sean or Frank will come right behind me, take the rod from me. Here, Frank, give me that. They'll hand me my other rod. I rig it up, I throw it in the bottom, and I actually caught my first double-digit blackfish just like that. He was hung up. I rebaited the other rod. I casted it right out, and I got the big bite, and there you go. But if I wasn't hustling to get that extra couple minutes of time in the water, I probably wouldn't have caught that fish.
Yeah. And you know what else is funny akin to that? There's a video on YouTube that I'm sure everybody in this video has watched, and that's Johnny Bucktail's video with himself and Papa Curtis. Johnny catches a monster fish in that video, absolute stud blackfish, and everybody's looking at that fish and looking how big it is. And you know what Curtis is doing? He's right back in that same hole because he knows there's another one, and it turned out to be an even bigger one.
And why did he do that, Matt? Why did that happen?
Because he's a legend. He knows what he's doing. It's time in the water.
You're right. Well, obviously, because Papa is Papa. But the big fish window opens during the course of the day. If there's a big fish on the other side of the boat hooked up, chances are within 10 minutes, all the big fish that are caught in the day will usually get caught all within that short period of time. It might be 10, 15, 20 minutes. Maybe the tide slacks out, whatever, the boat's laying in the right spot, whatever. There's a certain set of conditions that make those big fish come out and eat at that one time during the day. It's even so much last year, I think it was the year before last. It was like December 28th. There was like 2 weeks of horribly windy weather where nobody got out. All of a sudden, we had this beautiful day up and down the whole coast. Boats were out from like Montauk down to Ocean City, Maryland. And I think that day there were close to 30 double-digit blackfish caught by different anglers in different ports up and down the coast that day. But that one day, whether those fish starved for 2 weeks, but whatever, the conditions were right. And those big fish chewed their faces off that day.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. The best day I had last year was a day that the big fish just wanted to chew. I had 5 of them, right at 10 or over 10. And it was, that's probably the best day of my life. Happiest I've ever been. And it was a piece of structure that we fished all season. I mean, we picked plenty of big fish off of that piece. We caught them. We let plenty of big fish go back there. So I know there's lots of them down there. But typically in a trip, we have 1, 2, maybe 3 fish total for the boat. I had 5 myself that day in that spot. And for whatever reason, that day, late January this past year, they wanted to chew. And luckily for me, they wanted to chew my jigs a lot. So it was absolutely awesome. But we got through the article. We got about 10 minutes left here. So I kind of want to open it up to the chat and kind of get some people's opinions and feedback. One thing we kind of passed over while we were talking about bouncing sinkers, is what we're talking about when we talk about that is somebody who's bouncing a sinker and slamming it down. There's a big difference, as Curtis mentioned, as a couple of small bounces on a sinker, or as Chris mentioned, bouncing a jig is a lot different than bouncing a 10-ounce sinker. Given the rod butt a little tap or a little shake, is something that, you'll see a lot of times from guys who have been out and guys have put the time in that know that little bit of action could spark some curiosity. I mean, tog are a curious species of fish. It's in the whole family of wrasses in the ocean. They're curious fish. If you go to an aquarium store, there's wrasse fish. You learn about tropical fish. These fish are out. They're kind of curious. They're looking around. They want to see what's going on. And so if you get a little bit of dust up, I mean, you'll notice a lot of times, and you can tell me if it's true for you, but when my bait first gets down there, I got more action than if I just let my bait sit there and don't do anything. And I don't know if that's from the bait hitting the ground and maybe a little bit of silt coming up. And if it's on a clear day, those fish are like, hey, what's going on over there? Let me go check that out.
Especially on the first drop of the day.
Yeah. Oh,
first
absolutely.
bait to the bottom usually gets bit right away.
I agree. They want to see what's going on. And Chris asked about jig colors earlier for me. And I think that some people are with that too. They want a bright color jig or a glow jig because those blackfish will see that and they'll say, hey, what's that? What's going on over there? I want to check it out. But for me, I think the big blackfish kind of, are going to come over when there's a whole big scene of fish eating and they're old, they're smart, they know what's going on. So when they know there's food around, they're around, but they're not necessarily going to come over just because your jig glows green or
right.
what have you.
I just, and we all heard the stories. I mean, occasionally a blackfish will eat a diamond jig, but I'm really much more comfortable using anything that's non-reflective.
Yeah.
Anything that's, painted a color, I don't care. As long as it's not glossy and shiny and a big brand new sinker.
I know a lot of you guys paint your sinkers red so they look like a sinker when they get down there. I got you. So, like I said, we'll go to the chat here. We'll see if we can chat with
I don't know
anybody.
what you're talking
Matt,
about, by the way.
Matt has a question. When fishing instructor that's new to you, do you prefer fishing near the stern or you bounce around the boat and try to find the structure you're looking for? So if I'm on a party boat, I'm going to fish, where I'm set up when we stop the boat. I want to be in the water as fast as I can. So my line is down and in where I'm at. But when I'm fishing, my head is on a swivel. Absolutely. I have my line in the water. I know where my line is. I got a good feel for my rod. I can feel every little tap. My head is doing this. I want to know what every other person on that boat is doing. And when I'm lined up and I can see all the way down the side of the rail and I see, Joe Schmo, who's brand new to talking and doesn't know what he's doing. He keeps reeling up his line and he's got empty hooks, or I see somebody, stuck in the bottom. I'm making a move. I want to go there. I want to fish the structure. I want to fish where the guy's getting robbed. I want to fish next to those guys. So for me, when we're on a party boat and we're talking about party boat fishing, I want to fish wherever I am, but I want to, be ready to move to a more productive spot on that bottom. What about you?
See, I'm going to cover some ground where I'm at. When we first stop, I'm going to drop straight down and see what happens. If I'm not getting bit right away, I'm going to start casting out about maybe 20 feet away from the boat. And I'm going to cast straight out, just straight out away from me. If I don't do too good there, the next retrieve in, I'm going to cast out to 10 o'clock. The next one, I'm going to cast out to 11 o'clock. And I'm going to see if I can get on a different piece of structure. If I'm landing in the sand, I'm going to let it land in the sand. I'm going to try to cast a little further. And then I'm going to slowly drag it back. And you feel soft, you feel soft, you feel soft. All of a sudden, you feel hard. Then I stop and I want to fish that little spot a little bit. I might get some bigger size fish that are sitting on some structure that's away from the main structure. So while Matt's running all around the boat looking for his little fish, I'm just over there trying to get a big one. Love you, Matt.
That's good. And honestly, I can be honest, I've never caught a double digit on a party boat. And maybe that's why. Maybe I move too much. But I'll tell you what, I'm usually high hook, and I'm almost always in contention for the pool. So it works for me on a party boat, and I'll catch the big ones with Tony, or I caught him with Tom Daffin. I had 2 on his boat last year on a 6-pack. So you definitely want to, that's my prescription. And Joe fishes, he mentioned in here, same goes for Tony's boat. When I'm fishing with Tony, it's a private boat. We run a 25 Parker. There's usually just 4 of us on the boat, sometimes 3. Sometimes I'm getting bit on one side of the boat and you're not getting bit on the other. So I like to move, and that's
Sure.
just how I've been. So let's. I had another question here. This one's for me. TJ wants to know why I prefer conventional over spin when jigging, and this is a good question because I am very much in the minority when it comes to jig fishing, and I'm more comfortable with a conventional rod set. For me, I like it because it's comfortable to reel for me in a left-handed fashion. So I get down. I like the way that it fights. I like the way that a conventional rod feels a little bit more than a spinning rod. Just it's just a comfortability factor for me. I do fish a spinning rod when I'm jigging blackfish. If I'm shallower than like 30 feet, 25 feet, I like the spinning gear. A little bit different conditions, and I can get away with it. It's I don't think it's as important to get a fish up and away, quickly 15, 20 feet. But I fish the conventional because I feel like I'm faster with it. And I can get the fish up away from those big, massive wreck structures. And that's, one of the key things and one of the key differences from fishing a rock pile in 25 feet, like we do in Rhode Island or inshore here, up off a Long Branch, what have you, than fishing in 70, 80 foot of water and fishing a piece of structure that comes off 30 feet off the bottom. And so for me, it's all about being quick, and I'm just comfortable with that left-handed retrieve conventional rod. Just a comfortability thing. I forgot to mention, and this will key into that point. In the beginning of Frank's article, I think Frank, it's the most, and I told you this before the show, it's the biggest takeaway in your article for me. In the very first paragraph, you're talking about big fish guys, and you say they play the big fish game, which is certainly not the easiest way by no means, but it is the way they deem most perfect for them. And I think that is the best piece of advice, or the one thing that big fish guys have that the rest of the pack doesn't, and that's confidence in their style of fishing and in their equipment that they're using. They know their equipment, they know how it works, they know what they need to do, and they're comfortable in that. And so that, for me, is my conventional setup, my 6'4" rod, my 15-pound braid, and my light set. I'm super confident in that equipment. I know it can handle big fish. I know it's quick. I know I'm quick with it. I know it's super light, and I feel everything. When I'm down there, I feel a Bergal that's 3 inches tapping my bait. I can feel that. Where, some guys don't want to feel that. Captain Jerry fishes monofilament, and he's not going to feel those bites. And for him, who catches big fish out of the window, out of the side of his boat, that's what works for him. He doesn't want to feel those small bites. So when he feels his bite, he knows that that's the right fish. And it works for both of us. So that's two different styles of fishing. We have two different styles of fishing. But the one thing that we all have in common is confidence and comfortability with our stuff.
And also a commitment to play that big fish game. That's the other part of that meaning. Big fish guys play the big fish game, not by accident. It's absolutely by design. From all of their rigging all the way down to the way they bait, the way they set the hook. It's all part of trying to get that big fish to eat and committing to try to get a bigger fish. I mean, it doesn't always happen. They're rare and you have to work for them. But the reason I'm saying that is because big fish guys, it's a great thing to learn, to get experience from big fish guys. A lot of guys are quick to offer experience because they read something on the internet or they heard from somebody that this was a good thing to do. But maybe their biggest fish, maybe they're a well-meaning guy, but their biggest fish is an 8-pounder. If you want to gear up for an 8-pound fish, it's totally different than if you want to gear for a 20-pound fish. And it's that 20-pound fish absolutely takes commitment. I only know one dude that went out one time and got like an 18-pound fish. It was the first blackfish he ever caught. I'm like, okay, you got me. I wish it was me, but it's not.
I hate those guys. I brought my buddy out one time on a party boat, first time party boat togging, 14-pounder, the only fish he caught all day. Sometimes it's better to be lucky than good,
Absolutely.
We got a question for you, Frank, from Jeff. I think this one's they're trying to start a debate here, but what do you got? Does it bug you when you're fishing a rig and the guy next to you is fishing a jig?
Not at all, Jeff. As long as he's careful. Sometimes when you're fishing a jig, like Matt, you'll fish a 3/4 ounce jig and you'll cast it up current and you'll let it come down and it'll settle on the bottom. And maybe the swell is kind of washing your bait a little bit on the bottom and it's moving a little and it's moving a little. As long as you're not up current of me, letting your bait wash into where my bait is, I'm okay. If we start getting snagged once, I might, okay. You start getting snagged twice, I might be like, yo, bud, I was doing pretty good here without you. You know what I mean? Give it a couple feet or put on a heavier sinker. Stop snagging me up, will you? Because when they snag with you, then it's taking time away from your chances of catching a fish.
I agree, and I think that's the biggest qualm that a lot of people have. I know Joe Zagorski posts his rules. You post them for him because he's always in Facebook jail. But he posts his rules about, about going togging. And he states in there, and this is the thought that a lot of guys have, is that if you're fishing a rig, that they don't want a jig fisherman next to them, or the jig fisher shuts off the bite, or they're afraid that you're going to break off. And I like to disagree, because I always want to fish a jig, but I know that if I'm on a party boat, or if I'm on a boat where a lot of guys are fishing sinkers, that I need to be respectful of the people around me and their style of fishing. So if I'm on a party boat and say I move to a side, like we talked about, like Mike said, we're going to keep those skates on. I want to keep moving around. Then I'm going to come out and I'm going to see where everybody else's line is. You got to have self-awareness, folks. You got to know what the hell's going on around you. Otherwise, you're going to be a clown and nobody's going to want to fish with you. You're not going to get invited back. But if everybody's line is going out to the right, there's a nice strong current, I'm going to pitch up and away. So my jig is going to, come back and settle, and I'm not going to drag across three people's lines while I'm doing it. I get frustrated with myself if I tangle with somebody else's line, because, like you said, they're taking you out of the water. But if that happens, I'm taking myself out of the water, and it's all about bottom time. You want to be down there. You want to.
But at the same time, Matt, if they're down current of me, they could be standing on my right and they're in my bad zone. If they're standing on my left, they're not in my bad zone at all. Just a matter. Hey, ask the guy. Hey, man, is this going to bother you if I'm here? Is it better if I'm there? Work together.
I agree. Most people you're going to meet on a boat are respectable enough that you can have a conversation with them. Rich made a good point here. A lot of credit should go to the captain for putting on you on a productive piece. Absolutely. 100%. It is, there are certain guys who will catch big fish, but there are very few captains that will consistently put you on big fish. Mm-hmm. And if you're talking, charters in New Jersey, two names come to mind: Jerry Posterini and Tom Daffin. Those two captains in Jersey. I mean, there's some younger guys making their way up, but those two captains, without a doubt, are consistently on big blackfish for their clients.
Al Credelli's good out of Sea Isle too.
Al's another name that's good. Steve Moran is a guy you're going to see a lot, and these guys are catching. And there's a lot of guys that you're going to see bullshitting on Facebook posts that are putting up a 7 or an 8 pound backfish and calling it 11. That's one of my pet peeves. I hate seeing that, but it happens. It's a competitive industry. But there's certain guys, without a doubt, there's certain captains that know where those big fish live. We were talking. There was a lot in the chat about Tony, who's my one of my best friends. I go fishing with Tony all winter. All summer. That's, the boat I'm on 90% of my trips. We're absolutely dialed in. We know where they live. We know where we want to go. And Tony has a sixth sense. It's disgustingly sick, but he knows where those fish are going to feed and when they're going to feed there just out of nowhere. You kind of move throughout the season. You start in shallow and you move out deeper. It's just the natural flow of things. So, maybe last year we started in 45 foot. And then we moved out to 60 foot, and then to 70 foot, and then to 80 foot. Well, sometime in January, he had a hunch, or in late December, he had a hunch. He said, I don't think those fish were done eating in 50 foot. And I'm like, come on, man. Everybody's catching them in 70. Like, let's go to 70. Let's do our thing there. He's like, let's just go see what's. And we went to 50, and it was an absolute sleigh fest. And, that's something that if I was running that boat that day, I never would have went there. So, I mean, absolutely 100% respect to the captains that keep putting people on big fish. It is 100% a talent that some guys have for it.
And it's not easy. I mean, it's not easy, and it's expensive for Jerry to make the call. Hey, I'm going to make a run. I'm going to run 20 miles because conditions aren't right here. And he knows with this certain current we have that day, they're going to be right in this other spot. And he, you take a break for an hour, you sit back, you get ready to go, because all of a sudden he drops the hooks and you're on this new spot, and it's a bail job. And Jerry's the kind of guy too most captains are like this. They really want you to catch fish, and Absolutely. They want you to catch big fish. They're not going to come over and draw you diagrams, and they might not even talk to you. But they might say things during the course of the day that if you're careful and respectful and you listen to them, you'll pick up on these things. And of course, these relationships build with time when you're on the boat over and over again. the captain will become more comfortable talking to you. But you have to be respectful to not share all that information. You know, if you come home and start posting something on Facebook that, hey, guess what I figured out today? I'm going to
Yeah.
Well, guess what? Yeah, you're going to be really good friends next time you go on the boat.
Don't tell everybody secrets, you know.
Yeah, well, it's not your information to share, you know.
For sure. Don't paint your sinkers red. All right, Joel had a question. I'll let you take this one. I know what my answer is.
No.
Yeah, absolutely.
Swing them, baby. Swing them.
Yeah, that's right.
Rip
Cross their eyes.
Right off.
Yeah, for sure. I want to swing as hard as I can. I'm swinging for the fences when I'm ready to set. And you know, because when you land that, it's just such a good feeling anyway. And you know, obviously you want to get them up. The idea is shock and surprise.
The only time it's different, sometimes I fish in the back bays in South Jersey, like behind Margate and Longport, where I'm actually in like 15 foot of water. And I'm not using a pro togger, you know, I'm using a little rod, and I'm using I still might be using a 6-ounce weight, because in that back water, the current is so strong. It's so much more current running in the back bay because the water is shallow and it's confined. So the current flow is so much more concentrated than, Matt, if we're 5 miles off the beach, you can drop a 1-ounce jig in. You just drop the jig in and it goes right to the bottom. Bloop, 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 and you can see it stopping. It hits and it's perfect. You try to do that in the bay, it's going to go, you know, 100 feet behind the boat before it hits the bottom because the current takes it. But my point is, fishing in these backwaters is a lot more delicate because you're on a jetty. Usually you're next to a sod bank with really no other structure other than some mussel beds. So it's not the full contact togging we do when we're offshore looking for big fish.
Yep. So we got a couple questions we'll try to get through quick here. Tom wants to know what top shot I'm using with 15-pound braid. 30 is my go-to. I have everything from 25 Andy pink mono to 40-pound fluoro that I bring with me on every trip, but typically standard I'm going with 30. There was some conversation about big fish going on in the chat. Dante mentioned he caught 15 different pieces, big fish on lots of different pieces. So don't be afraid to try new stuff, guys. If you're out running your boat, there are big fish. There are big fish on lots of different pieces. There are successful pieces, and there are certain pieces that hold a multitude of big fish. So, I mean, though there might be 20 double digits on this piece, and there might be 100 on this piece, and this other piece might have 3. But definitely there are big fish on lots of pieces. So keep it moving and try a lot of stuff.
And those fish don't really move much from year to year. They usually that's their home. That's usually where they stay put.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of people think that tog are migrating hugely offshores, and I don't think that's the case. I think they're staying on their pieces, and that is where they live. And depending on the temperature of water, they're going to bite more or not in a different depth. So as we move deeper, as the water cools later in the season, that's because the water at the bottom under the thermocline is staying the same. Whereas in 15, 20 foot, or if you're fishing a jetty, that water gets really cold, and those fish are going to shut down.
Yeah, like this time of year, right after Halloween, that inshore jetty bite's just about shot.
Yeah, it's for me here in Barnegat, we have a couple more weeks, depending on the weather. Usually, it's pretty much dead by opening day. But last year, we had a good end of November, so it's very dependent on the weather. Henry wants to know braid to mono knot. For me, it's an FG. And the reason I tie an FG, it's complicated for a lot of people. I've been tying it for a long time. I've gotten really good at it. I can do it in 7-foot swells on the boat, in the fly, no problem. But it's because the rod I use has micro guides, and it's the only knot that fits through them without ripping my guide out. You tie
I'll use a Slim Beauty or a Yucatan knot.
Yeah, so I mean, there's plenty of knots that'll hold. Ideally, I'm probably not tying a uni to uni. I want something a little bit stronger than that. But there's lots of YouTube videos out to check them out. For me, it's an FG, super high strength, super high rated, a little bit complicated, but if you can learn it, it's the only knot you'll ever need. Let's see if we got anybody else here. Talking about party boats, the Big Mohawk is definitely a good party boat. You got the Ocean Explorer up there in Belmar as well. The Osprey comes down to Atlantic City. That's a great. That's my go-to if I'm going out in a party boat. It's 100% usually with the Osprey. I love the crew. I love the way they work there.
I like that they have white leggers too, and no bullshit.
and no additional charge. They throw
Right.
the rigs in, which obviously when you're blackfishing can be expensive.
Yeah, because if I'm spending the day on a party boat, and if I'm hopping on a boat in December and they have green crabs, if everybody on the boat's using green crabs, okay, we all got the same shot. But if I'm one guy on that boat using white leggers and everybody else has green crabs, y'all gonna hate me by the end of the day because I'm gonna be smoking them, and it's
sure.
just gonna take that bite right off them green crabs.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen down in Sea Isle that happen. Everybody's having green crabs, and you show up with whites and you kill it. Just a couple quick comments here, and we'll move through this. Talking about good party boats or good charter boats. Andrew Melly says fishmonger and white crab. I agree. Joe says fish and fever. Curtis says fish and fever. These are all great boats, and we're talking strictly Jersey. Me and Frank are Jersey guys, so we're talking Jersey, but we definitely left out some big fish guys outside of the state. Captain Kane, Captain John, legends.
Cape May Lady's a pretty good operation too.
I agree. That's a boat I haven't spent a lot of time on. So quite a ways for me. But I agree, and I know that you got a pretty big one on that boat. So
a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, if there's any other questions, we'll give it about 2 more minutes here, but we're already 13 minutes over time. So yeah, there's some other charter boats or that are kind of privately run. The Mimi in Point Pleasant is one. I love fishing with Captain Sam on the Mary M out of Barnegat Light. It's a larger head boat, but you got to book the whole boat and kind of fill the crew yourself. Captain Sam's a legend in his right. Dick says he misses the North Star.
I was on the North Star one time. I guess
that's a good place to end. Monty in Maryland, obviously, fantastic if you want to take a ride. But yeah, this is a good place to end for tonight. I think, like I said, we're a little bit over time, but I had a good time. I think everybody in the chat had a good time. You guys made me laugh a few times. We didn't necessarily talk about it, but Frank, thank you again so much for being here and for doing this with me.
Thanks,
I had
Matt.
a good time.
Me too.
I appreciate you. You FFFF. But yeah, so again, I just want to say, just hang tight for a second, Frank. I'll get you out of here at the end here. But thank you guys for tuning in and for joining us on the High Hook Podcast, Episode 1. So we're gonna stay with Fisherman's Headquarters for a while, for the next few of these at least. And as long as you guys keep tuning in, I will keep hosting them. We'll have some different topics. We'll talk about different types of fishing. But I want to send out a humongous thank you to Fisherman's Headquarters for giving us this platform and giving us this opportunity to do this. Not only have they done this for us, but they did something special for you guys as well. And that is 15% off store-wide anything in stock at fishermansheadquarters.com. You can use promo code HIGHHOOK to get 15% off your entire order. And that is absolutely everything in stock. Daiwa, Shimano, Jigging World, all the best products for blackfishing, absolutely everything. Magic Tail, bucktails, and Magic Tail tog jigs in stock, always. Magic Tail for life. Cortland line, the best braid, in my opinion, the highest abrasion resistance for braid. Cortland line, Magic Tail, bucktails, tog jigs. Can't absolutely miss that out. I'm going to give Paul, you're absolutely right. I'll give Paul a shout out here. The JCA Tog Tournament is coming up. So if you guys are big fish guys and you want to compete with some of the best, check that out. There's multiple places, so you don't even have to get the biggest fish to win that. But the JCA Tog Tournament's coming up. There's a couple other ones coming up. Captain Bill's Landing, the Forked River Tuna Club, is having a tog tournament as well. But again, 15% off. Fisherman's Headquarters, they're our sponsors. We'll be back. We'll do this again. Thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time on High Hook.